talk tonight is about U.S. policy towards Iraq. And not a longer title, but you can figure the title out later. It's a tough topic to start a semester off on because there's nothing really good to say about what we've done and the consequences of our actions. So I'm just setting this up this way because I just sort of want to apologize up front and early, just because I'd rather have started the semester talking about ancient Egypt or something. Having said that, it's also impossible to ignore Iraq on the news right now, and so that's the reason why I'm doing this. I'm going ahead and jumping right in. It might, you know me, I'm going to give you background. I'm not going to start you in the middle of the story. Now, I can't start you at the beginning either because there just isn't enough time. But I am going to give you a little bit of background. So let's start by doing this. First of all, what we call the state of Iraq today was in the ancient world Mesopotamia. The term Iraq is a modern term. It's probably only been in use for just under 100 years. We're talking about 96 years or so. The exact origin of the term isn't really clear. There's been attempts to try and pinpoint where the Brits got the word Iraq. There is an ancient Arabic word, it's no longer in use, that is similar to it. I think it's Arak or something like that, and it means riverbank. And so maybe they got it from there. There's the ancient Iraqi city of Uruk, which was a city-state for a while and very powerful. Maybe the Brits took Uruk and turned it into Iraq. Who knows? We don't know. We have no clue. But it is, as you've kind of guessed already, a British-invented term. So the story is actually going to start with the Brits. Mesopotamia eventually will end up as part of the Ottoman Empire, and by the time the story that I'm going to tell you now really gets going, the Ottoman Empire is in very serious decline. By 1900, in fact, the Ottoman Empire has lost considerable chunks of territory. The Ottoman Empire had conquered all the way to Algeria. They didn't get Morocco, but they turned it into a vassal state. They conquered all the way to Algeria, and they've lost, by 1900, all of their North African territory. They had conquered huge chunks of what is now today Iran. They had conquered all the way around the Black Sea. So they had conquered huge chunks of what today is Ukraine, bits of Russia. They had conquered Georgia at one point, huge swaths of Armenia. And they had gone all the way into the Balkan states. They had Greece, they had Albania. They went all the way into Hungary, into parts of Hungary. They had Romania, a huge chunk of Romania, not all of it, but a huge chunk of it. This was a massive empire. And when the Ottomans created this empire, their goal was to recreate the Roman Empire, but to make a Muslim version of it. And they kind of succeeded. The empire didn't exactly overlap what the Romans had conquered, but they did have a huge chunk of what the Romans had conquered. They probably had a little bit more than half of the Roman Empire. They had the Roman Empire's last capital, Constantinople, and that became their capital. When the Ottoman Empire went into decline, it took a long time. First of all, it wasn't a long-lasting empire. It started in the early 1400s, and it was gone by the 1900s. So we're only talking about a 500-year length of time. We're not talking about an empire like the Roman Empire or the Persian Empire, which lasted for 1,000 years. It wasn't an empire like that. It was a little bit more short-lived. Its heyday was in the 1500s. The Ottoman Empire brought its army right up to the city of Vienna. But by 1900, it's in such bad shape, it's in such miserable shape, in fact, that the British are actually just sort of picking off chunks of it. They were in the Arabian Gulf, erroneously called the Persian Gulf. They were in the Arabian Gulf, just grabbing a piece here, grabbing a piece there. Bahrain, for example, they just pull it off. Qatar, they pull it off. The United Arab Emirates just pop it right off. And in 1900, they pop off the last piece before World War I. And that piece was Kuwait. Kuwait, up until that moment, had been part of the Basra province of the Ottoman Empire. Then World War I happens. Happy 100th anniversary. World War I happens, and the Ottoman Empire sides with Germany. Obviously, the Ottomans are going to lose, and the Germans are going to lose World War I. And the British and the French had made a deal. And the deal was to carve up the Ottoman Empire like a Thanksgiving Day turkey, pun intended, since it ended up becoming turkey. They do. The agreement that they made prior to the defeat of the Ottoman Empire was called Sykes-Picot. A Brit named Sykes and a Frenchman named Picot got together and they pulled out a map of the Ottoman Empire and some surrounding territory. For example, it was called the Persian Empire still, it wasn't an empire anymore. They got Persia and the Ottoman Empire and they just took a crayon and started carving off chunks, as every good school kid does when they start fantasizing how cool it would be if you could put the borders somewhere else. And the British decided, of course, they're going to get Palestine because they really wanted Jerusalem, because the Brits were really stuck on their failure of the Crusades. And it's the British Empire. They're in charge of the world at this point, so they can have whatever they want. So they go, okay, Palestine is ours. They wanted southern Iran, and here's why. When just around the time of them carving off Kuwait, and it's probably no coincidence, the British realized they're in a really awkward position. There were two major oil companies on planet Earth in 1900. That's it, just two. And it's because the original Saudi Arabia, anyone want to guess what the original major oil producing state on Earth was? The United States. The original Saudi Arabia, we're obviously not anymore. What happened? We pumped it out of the ground because it's a finite resource that we will eventually run out of, whether we frack the continent to pieces or not, right? It's just a done deal. This is what happens. The original Saudi Arabia, the United States, had a company take off and become super powerful and gobble up all the other oil corporations, to the point where that corporation eventually became so dominant it owned 95% of all the oil production and sales in the United States. And that was Standard Oil. The other company, there were three. The other two companies were Royal Dutch, which was a Dutch company, and Shell, which was an English company, but Shell got bought by Royal Dutch and it became Royal Dutch Shell, with the Dutch owning 51%. So effectively, the English now no longer had their own oil company. Turns out, of course, that the Netherlands was their close ally, and the United States was their close ally. So it wasn't a disaster, it was just scary to them. Scary for a couple of reasons. One, what if something went wrong? For example, what if the United States elected a crazy president and the alliance falls apart? Or what if Germany invades the Netherlands and conquers it and they lose access to Royal Dutch Shell oil? Right? They just didn't want to take those chances. That's one reason it's scary to them. The other one is they're starting to speculate. The British are starting to speculate. It's 1900. The ships are still powered by steam, coal-powered steam. They're not powered by oil yet. The British are looking into the future, something we can't do. They were looking into the future, and they were figuring in 1900, World War I, the ships were still powered by coal, right? So even 18 years later, they're still powered by coal, but they're already figuring it's a matter of time before we start switching over to oil. It's just a matter of time before that becomes the dominant energy resource on planet Earth. And if they don't have their own company, that's a lot of profit they're missing out on. So the Brits do something really strange. At the time, the way you found oil, so 1900, the way you found oil was you just walked and you stared at the ground. You had to look at the ground. You know, people are always telling you, stop looking at the ground. Dude, there are really good things on the ground. You should look at the ground once in a while. What you do is, if you felt something squishy, you looked at the bottom of your foot, and if there was like a tarry-like oily substance on them, on your shoes, hey, you did it. I'm serious. This is about as sophisticated as it got. It got a little more sophisticated. You could also look for black shale, sometimes black sandstone, one of these really porous rocks that would absorb oil if it was near oil. And so you just go along and, oh, black shale, pretty good chance. So now we found it. So now what do? We pull out a crew with shovels and dig. Right? No more sophisticated than that. Just pull out a crew with shovels and just start digging. And for every calorie spent, you could get about 100 back. That was the return. So you got, a few men out there digging a hole, and for every calorie spent working on getting that oil out of the ground, you got about 100 back, which is a really nice return. Like if you were told, I'll give you for every dollar you put in my investment, I'm going to give you $100 back, you'd probably be a moron not to invest every dollar you have. You know what I mean? It's not guaranteed. Could be that where you're digging's the wrong spot, but when it comes through, it's great. The Brits need to find a new oil resource for them to create a new oil company around. And so they decide to do something really strange, and that was read history books. Yeah, that would never occur to us. You know what I mean? We can't read again. And then, clearly, history books? What would we do that for? If you could read, you'd read like a magazine or something. They start reading history books because they're looking for historical evidence of oil usage in the past. And boom, there it is. The Arabs. The Arabs were using oil to light their cities at night 1,000 years ago. They had oil lamps in their streets. If you could take a satellite backwards in time and put it in orbit around the Earth so that it was always at night, and just take pictures of the planet Earth at night, even 1,200 years ago, the whole planet was pitch black, right? Except the Middle East and North Africa, it would have twinkled like it does today. Maybe not quite as bright as it is today, but it would twinkle nonetheless. So the Brits go, okay, the Arabs had oil. And then they dug a little deeper and they realized, oh my God, they even had hand grenades that were made out of glass that were filled with oil. And they would light them and throw them in battle. That would suck. And then they read a little bit further and they realized that the Romans had invented the flamethrower. And the Arabs had put Constantinople under siege, and the Romans, it was the first siege? I think it was the first siege. Could be the second siege. The Arabs put Constantinople under siege multiple times and kept failing to get it. It was driving them nuts. But one of the first two sieges, they put it under siege, and the Roman emperor said, I will give a money reward to the person who can make an invention to prevent the fall of the city, because he was done. There was nothing holding the city back from falling. The Arab navy was huge. It outnumbered the Roman navy. The Arab army had the city completely surrounded. It was just a matter of time. And the siege, I think, had lasted 4 years. And a Syrian, a Greek Syrian citizen of the Roman Empire, Christian Greek citizen, Syrian from the Roman Empire, invented the flamethrower using oil. And they call it Greek flame, even though it's the Roman Empire. Anyway. And the Arab Navy came out. It's the Horn, which is the bay that shoots up just north of the city of Constantinople. And the Arab Navy pulls up thinking, we got this thing. The Greek Navy, the Roman Navy comes out with their Greek flame. And the Arabs just assume it's going to be a good old naval battle. And next thing you know, and the Arab Navy catches on fire and burns. And that's how they save the city. So the British are like, okay, there's oil. It's in the Middle East, which they called the Near East, by the way. The Far East was China, Japan, Korea. The Middle East was India. The Near East was what we now call the Middle East. And so they, and of course we've renamed India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, South Asia, so that the Near East can be the Middle East. So if you hear people refer to the Middle East as the Near East, it's because they're using the British term as opposed to the American term. So the Brits go to the Middle East, Near East, and they start walking, because that's, it's there, it's just, now you gotta find it. And they find it in 1901, 1 year after they carved Kuwait out of the Basra province of the Ottoman Empire. They find it in Persia, in a part of Persia called Khuzestan, which is really ironic because it's the Arab part of Persia. So, Persia is like Iran is like the one major source of one major proven oil reserve source on Earth that's not Arab, but it's in the Arab part. So God clearly wanted the Arabs to have a lot of oil. And so the Brits find it. They immediately go to the Qajars, who are the rulers of the Persians, at the time they were Turks, who liked opium a lot. And the Brits go, hey, we would like to set up an oil company. What kind of concession would you give us? And they negotiate, and the Brits get a 95% concession. 50-50 is normal. 95 is fantastic. The only thing the Brits have to do to make the Qajars happy is keep the opium flowing so that they can stay high permanently. They were great rulers. And so the Brits, of course, are so excited, 95%. You know, like, they'll use Persian labor, it'll be British engineering, it's Persian oil, and they get 95% of the profits. Who could ask for more? And they establish the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, APOC. And they start drilling, and they are happy. They've got it. They've got their own oil company. And things are okay until the Persians get uppity. In 1905, jerks that they are, they decide to get rid of the Qajars because they're sick of their opium smoking and create a democracy. Can you believe it? What gall these Persians had. Democracy. And the Brits realize that one of the first things a democracy is going to do is vote to get rid of the 95% concession and probably reduce it to 50-50. And the Brits are like, no, that's not going to work. So in 1906, they organize the Iranian clergy to overthrow the democracy. They go to the mullahs and the ayatollahs, and they get them to overthrow the democracy, and they pull it off. It works. And they overthrow Iran's first attempt at democracy. Now, why Kuwait? Well, the Brits already knew there was oil in the Middle East before they carved Kuwait off. If there's oil in the Middle East and it's under Ottoman soil, Kuwait's right at the mouth of the Shatt al-Arab, which is where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers merge. It becomes the Shatt al-Arab. So it's right there. So if the Turks are sending their oil by ship, it has to pass right past Kuwait. So the Brits could conceivably interrupt any oil deliveries that the Turks might make to the Germans by just simply sinking the ships using Kuwait as sort of a blockade point. Another possibility is that there's even oil in Kuwait, but they don't know. In fact, they don't find out until years later. It turns out there is. It turns out there's a lot, but they didn't know at the time. But it turned out it was a really good spot to carve out a country. They're thinking that it's going to be useful for the purpose of extracting oil from the Middle East or preventing Germany from extracting oil from the Middle East. Because Germany has become, in 1900, it's becoming clear Germany is Great Britain's #1 rival. They're in an arms race. The Germans build a ship, the British build 2. So the Germans go, well, you just built 2. I guess we have to build another ship. So the Germans would build a ship, and then the British would go build 2. And the Germans go, oh, wow, I guess we have to build another ship. And the Brits go, okay, here's another 2. And they kept doing this, and they were going to both bankrupt each other. There was no way they could sustain this indefinitely. It's why we have World War I. I know you were told it was because of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. People are assassinated all the time, and it doesn't start world wars. That is the most nonsensical story you've ever been told, except maybe Abraham Lincoln was born in a log cabin he built with his own hands. That's how amazing it was. It's really incredible. And it was in Kentucky. What happened was the Brits and the Germans used the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand as a great excuse to go ahead and have World War I to prevent their states from going bankrupt because they were in an arms race building ships. All right? Now, ironically enough, World War I, there was one naval battle. It's called the Battle of Jutland. Didn't happen until 1917. The German Navy came out, the Brits went to meet them, the Germans sank more British ships and then turned around and ran back to port. The Brits claimed they won because they drove the Germans away, the Germans claimed they won because they sank more British ships, and both sides didn't do anything really with their Navy, they just sent 18-year-old boys to murder each other in trenches instead. So like the whole war was caused by a naval arms race and the Navy played zero role. So, World War I finally comes along, and here's how Sykes-Picot went. The Brits were going to split Persia, it's still called Persia at the time. They were going to split it in half. They were going to take the southern half, Khuzestan is in the south, so they get their oil source, their oil secured. And then the Russians were going to invade Persia and take the northern half. By the way, the Russians were never consulted. The Brits and the French are just drawing lines on a map, and they don't even bother to ask Russians, did you want the northern half? They just assumed it's a done deal. The Russians will also get Constantinople, which is kind of nice. The capital, the one-time capital of the Roman Empire, the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The Russians are going to get that. And they'll get the Dardanelles and Bosporus, the Straits. They'll give them access to the Mediterranean from the Black Sea. So they would be happy if they were consulted. And then the Greeks are going to get Izmir and the whole western part of the Anatolian Peninsula. And then Antalya and the very southwestern corner was going to go to Italy. And then the French were going to get what is now Iraq, Mesopotamia. It was 3 provinces in the Ottoman Empire: the Basra province, the Baghdad province, and the Mosul province. Minus Kuwait, because Kuwait was carved out of the Basra province. And then the French were also going to get Syria. And then the British would get Palestine. That was the deal. World War I gets going. Next thing you know, Russia has a communist revolution. Next thing you know, Russia surrenders to the Germans, and they quit the war, and they tell the Western allies, they tell the French and the British to go to hell, and they're not going to participate in any type of imperialism because they're against imperialism, and they're out of the picture. The Brits know they cannot conquer Iran by themselves. By this point, by the way, they've attacked Afghanistan 3 times. They're actually still in it during World War I. They'll be driven out in 1920. They know they can't hold Afghanistan. There's no way they're going to be able to hold Iran without help. So they need the Russians to take the northern half. The Russians are out of the picture, so the Brits aren't getting it. Well, the Brits knew that the Ottoman Empire had oil because they had just found it, and the Ottoman Empire had just struck a deal with the Germans over that oil right before World War I broke out. They never delivered it because the Brits simply shut down the possibility of delivering it. That oil was found in what is now northern Iraq in the Mosul province. So the Brits turn to the French and they go, sorry, we didn't get Iran. I guess you're not getting Iraq. And they just simply take it. So they alter Sykes-Picot. The Russians don't try to capture Constantinople and the Bosporus and the Dardanelles either. But the Greeks and the Italians do invade. So even though they were never consulted when they were carving it up, when they were told what their pieces were, they were like, oh, cool. And they go in. The Turks drive the Greeks and the Italians out. But there's nothing they can do about, there's nothing the Turks can do about what they've just lost to the French and the Brits, because the part that the French and the Brits took wasn't Turkish, it was Arab. And in fact, there was an Arab uprising in the middle of World War I. And the Arab uprising had been so successful that it captured Jerusalem and it captured Damascus before the Brits could get there. And so the Arabs had actually carved out their own territory. And the British had even allowed the Arabs to think that the Arabs would be allowed to rule themselves and establish their own kingdom. The Faisal from Hejaz was going to become the first Arab king of this new Arab kingdom that would include what is today Saudi Arabia, Syria, Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon. And the Brits had let the Arabs believe this. Instead, now that World War I is over, the Brits want to enact Sykes-Picot, which means that the Arabs need to lose all that territory. Faisal had actually gone to Damascus, and they set up their own military, they set up their own state, they had a government, and the British and the French did everything they could to disrupt the government, and then finally the British invade. They come in through Lebanon, they attack Syria. Faisal sent an Arab army to meet the French. They fight the Battle of Maysalun. The Arabs didn't have a chance. They actually put up an amazing battle considering how badly outmatched they were, mostly because the French came in with artillery and tanks and airplanes, and the Arabs didn't have those things. They did have some artillery pieces, but the Arabs are doing cavalry charges trying to break up the French advance. It's just impossible. They couldn't pull it off, so they lose. And then the British turn around and they look at King Faisal and they go, hey, I hear you're unemployed. You just lost Syria. You just lost the capital of your little kingdom. And by the way, the British in the meantime helped the Saudis overthrow Faisal in Hejaz, which is now part of Saudi Arabia. And then the Saudis then create Saudi Arabia. So he's lost everything. He's lost Syria and he's lost Saudi Arabia. And so the Brits go, we'll make you the king of Iraq. And then we'll make a cousin of yours the king of Jordan. And everything will be fine. It's okay. And he goes, okay. Next thing you know, the British create Iraq. And the way they do it is they take Mosul, Baghdad, and the Basra province, but they cut the Basra province in half. Saudi Arabia gets the southern half. Kuwait already got it, was a piece of it. So the northern half goes to Iraq. And the Iraqis don't like this. They don't want British rule, because the king's just going to be a puppet. They don't want British rule. They don't want British presence. And so they rise up against the Brits. And the Brits then conduct the first ever airplane-delivered mass bombing campaign against an urban center. And they bomb the city of Baghdad. Isn't that crazy? And the world freaks out. Nobody can believe they're bombing civilians like this. And the British people get upset. And Prime Minister David Lloyd George, what's wrong with that guy? He has 3 first names. Anyway, hyphenated Lloyd George. His last name was Lloyd George. Prime Minister David Lloyd George gets up in front of Parliament and he says, Great Britain reserves the right to bomb niggers. Isn't it incredible? No, we don't have a racist past. Unbelievable, right? I mean, what a statement, especially when you consider, like, all the Iraqis are going, wait a minute, I'm not black. But of course the term just meant anybody not white. And eventually the Iraqis submit. They eventually break down and they accept British occupation and they accept this new thing called Iraq. And they eat their pride. And they accept this. And the Arabs accept French rule in Syria and Lebanon, and they accept British rule in Palestine and Jordan. It's done. There's nothing they can do at this point. They've lost it. They had a chance, and it was taken away from them. Iraq is more or less stable after this, under the monarchy. And then in 1958, there's a revolution in Iraq, and the monarchy is overthrown. King Faisal III is actually executed by the Iraqi public. There is a moment when it looks like Iraq is going to join a thing called the United Arab Republic, but then it backs out at the last moment and doesn't actually join. And then the leader of Iraq, a guy named Qasem, is eventually assassinated, and Iraq goes into this terrible period of instability. One government after the other. They just come and they collapse. There's military dictatorships. They attempt to restore order. They fail. There are coups, military coups against the military government. It's that bad. And eventually the Baathists take over. And when they do manage to hold on to power. They get into control and they do manage to hold on to power. And the 70s ends up becoming a relatively stable period of time for Iraq. It's a complicated place to rule because it's got 2 ethnicities. The dominant Arab population, which is about 80%, and then the Kurds in the north. The Kurds got really screwed by Sykes-Picot. The Kurds got carved up between Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey. And so as a result, they ended up constantly agitating for statehood. They wanted to unify with their, the other pieces. And so it makes Iraq a little bit unstable. On top of it all, the majority of the population is about 60% Shia. So the country is 40% Sunni, so about 20% Sunni Arab, about 60% Shia Arab, and then about 20% Sunni Kurd. So it's a little complicated, but not that complicated. Not as complicated as you want to think it is. And here's why. Because none of that really mattered 60 years ago. In fact, there's a myth that you have that you probably perpetuate. And that is that the Middle East has always been a really violent place. Since biblical times, you're told. The Middle East has been this unbelievably violent place. It's true, there are outbreaks of violence in the Middle East. And almost always, it's because somebody not in the Middle East has invaded. For example, the Crusades. Or, for example, World War I, when the French and the British invaded. It is true that places like Jerusalem get contested over, but almost always because somebody outside has come in. For example, when the Roman Empire conquered Palestine and subjugated the Jewish and Semitic, because there was also a large non-Jewish population, but there was still Semitic population of Palestine. All right? So, yes, there has been violence in the Middle East, but it's frequently by non-Middle Easterners. If you look at the number of wars that took place in the Middle East between, say, 500, I'm picking the date, not really all that randomly, the western part of the Roman Empire collapses in 476. So I'm sort of picking the post-Western collapse so that we can get kind of a sense of medieval Europe. If you pick the year 500 AD, and then tallying up the number of wars that took place in the Middle East, you would find a fair amount, but not a particularly large amount. If you were to look at the number of wars in Europe in that 1500-year time span, your mind would explode. Europe was an unbelievably violent bloodbath that was just basically perpetual. And then people go, "But look at how calm Europe is today." Oh, you mean like Ukraine? Yeah, that's great. Oh no, you mean like Yugoslavia in the 90s? Yeah, that was calm. Yeah, there's no more war in Europe. Like there's this myth that somehow Europe is calm. It's true compared to the pre-World War II period. Right now, what's going on in Europe is nothing because it's normally a bloodbath in Europe. So throw that out. Get this. They've always been fighting for that land. Just nonsense out of your mind. It's nonsense. It's historically not accurate. And to make things more interesting, historically the Arabs have been extremely tolerant. Tolerant to non-Arabs and tolerant to non-Muslims. Because the Arab population, that when the Arabs created their empire, they ended up ruling. You've got to remember, when the Arabs come out of the Arabian Peninsula, the Muslim Arabs, I need to clarify, they actually have to fight the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire to come out. And they don't have to fight them, they could have chosen not to, but they do. They conquer the Persian Empire outright. They destroy it. They run it over like a speed bump. And they cripple the Roman Empire, and it will never recover. In fact, the Turks will eventually finish the Roman Empire off in 1453. When the Arabs come out and they conquer this empire, which, by the way, they do a lightning speed. They're on the border of China within just a few decades. And by 700, they're invading Iberia. They're invading Spain. So in about 70-year span of time, they owned everything from Spain to China. It's unbelievable. It's one of the fastest, largest conquests of a huge chunk of territory ever. And they're instantly a tiny minority in their own empire, right? There's very few Muslims. There are very few Arabs. They're ruling over a population of Christians and Zoroastrians. And there was actually a significant population of Buddhists, in fact, in that area. And they end up, and pagans, there were still pagans running around worshiping Zeus, Jupiter, Serapis. And they end up ruling this area with enormous degree of tolerance. And that becomes the theme in the Middle East. Having said that, we're looking to disrupt that. The United States is, and here's why. The United States decides in the 1950s, under the Eisenhower administration, that there is a force in the Middle East that we don't like, that it's in direct opposition to U.S. foreign policy. And that force is none other than secular, Arab nationalist socialism. There was a movement of socialist leaders in the Arab world who were Arab nationalists, but not like nationalists like the virulent form that you see in Europe, where you're like murdering each other because you're not that. It's Arab nationalism in a very different way. It wasn't like German nationalism where, let's conquer Poland, wipe out the Poles, and make Germany bigger. That Arab nationalism didn't look like that at all. What Arab nationalism was let's take all the Arab states from Morocco to Iraq and put them together and make the single state out of them so that we don't end up being the weaklings that we are, right? You know this philosophy. United we stand, divided we fall. This is our motto. They're just imitating us. And they're not doing it because they're planning to wipe out the Kurds or they're planning to wipe out the Turks or the Persians. They're doing it because they feel like they're in a position of inferiority because they're chopped up. There's about 22 Arab states, right? If you put that together and made one state instead of 22, it'd be a hell of a lot more powerful and it wouldn't be easy to pick on them all the time. Those Arab nationalists are also secular. They don't care what your religion is. In fact, the original founders of the Arab nationalist movement in 1919, when it started, were Copts. Copts are Christian Egyptians. It was actually Christians who started Arab nationalism in Egypt in 1919. And then they kept it going right into the 20s. So the founders of Arab nationalism were these Egyptian Christians. These guys are secular, so if you're a Jew, you're a Christian, you're a Shia, you're a Sunni, no one cared. It just wasn't a matter. It just wasn't an issue. And they were socialists. They believed that you should let the state have the major means of production, and then the state would make sure to redistribute the land, for example. Like in Egypt when the socialists did take over, they took these huge chunks of land that were owned by lords, and they had peasants on them. Egypt had peasants. And they cut the land up into pieces and handed it off to the peasants. Since Egypt switched and became a U.S. ally again, they've re-peasantized the farming system. And now you have lords again. They're not called that, but they're just landlords who own huge chunks of land and then hire peasants to work the land. So we help them get back to where they were. Don't worry. That phase of socialism is gone. And what they're thinking is, not only will they redistribute within the state, they will redistribute between the old states. So Saudi oil wealth will get shared. So obviously the Saudis are not okay with this. And by the way, Saudi means the Saudi royal family. It doesn't mean the population of Arabia. If you were to ever refer to the people who live in Arabia, they would be called Arabs or Arabians, really. Because it's Saudi Arabia. Saudi is the royal family. It would be like if we called this Obama America. Or, Windsory England. It's a really weird name. So when I say Saudis, I don't mean the public. I really do mean the Saudi royal family. The Saudi public doesn't have the oil wealth shared with them. It really is. There's a little trickling going to them. But the majority of it is held by a handful of people. So when these socialists are talking, they're saying, no, we're not going to do that anymore. Everybody's going to share their oil wealth. We're going to make the whole Arab world rise up together, hand in hand. That's their goal. We freak out. Eisenhower's like, oh no, we're not going to do this. In 1958, there's a convergence moment, a really exciting moment in the Middle East. It's in the aftermath of 1956. 1956, Great Britain, France, and Israel attack Egypt. And the US actually uses this as a chance to knock Great Britain and France down a notch. You're like, wait, I thought they were our allies. Come on. There's no such real thing. You know what I mean? Our goal in the post-World War II period was to destroy the British Empire and destroy the French Empire. Our goal was to break it up into little pieces and then take that stuff for ourselves. That was our goal in the aftermath of World War II. So, for example, in Iraq, there's a socialist and a communist uprising going on in the 1950s. So what do? We fund it. We send them equipment, money, weapons. Right? The Soviets are doing the same. They're looking at us going, what are you doing? You're helping our guys. And we're like, yeah, we don't care. We just want to get it away from Britain. Isn't Britain your friend? Yeah, we don't care. You were. Ha! When we found NATO in 1949, the Soviets, Stalin actually applied. They were like, okay, we'd like to join NATO too. And we go, you didn't get the memo? He's like, what memo? Yeah, you're the new enemy of the world. Wait, what? We just fought World War II together. We're like best friends. You call me Uncle Joe. Oh, yeah, that was so 1945. That was 4 years ago. We're not doing that anymore. Now you're the new villain. We hate you. You're evil. Oh, and we're going to change our Pledge of Allegiance, and we're going to throw God in because you're atheists. Yeah, we're going to change our motto. It used to be E Pluribus Unum, but we're going to switch it over to In God We Trust because you're atheists. And anything you do, that's evil. And it sounds like, I mean, I'm not a good guy by any means. I'm crazy. I do purges, you know. I do. But come on, we work together so well. You're not exactly the nicest people ever. You were Hitler's role model. He's running around doing speeches where he's like, we're going to do to Poland and Russia what the United States of America did to North America. You're not exactly nice guys either. Like, we can get along. Oh, no. That was the end of that. So anyways, 56. And Eisenhower actually calls in the UN to drive the British, the French, and the Israelis out of Egypt. And the British and the French don't want to fight the UN because that means that it's going to turn into a really weird war with the United States on the other side. And they withdraw in a humiliating, drubbing defeat. Right? They won militarily, but politically it was a catastrophe. And it's portrayed in the press as the post-World War II Waterloo for the British and the French. And it is. They're done, and this is exactly what we're gunning for. In 1958, the socialists and communists in Iraq prevail. We're thrilled because it means the Brits are now done in Iraq. By the way, in 1950, Iran tried to do that democracy thing again. Can you believe it? What's with these guys? Didn't they learn from 1905? Democracy. Anyway, they elect a guy named Mossadegh. Mossadegh was a socialist. And what first thing he wants to do is get rid of that 95% concession. Right? Because it's stupid. By the way, the company's been renamed. It's now the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. So it's no longer APOC. It's AIO. Whatever that is. And so here's what he does. He throws out the British embassy. First thing he does when he takes over, he throws out the British embassy. Why? Don't you want to talk to them? What are embassies for? So that your spies can have diplomatic immunity. Your embassies are your spy hub. You know this, right? That's where the CIA operates out of our embassies. Having an embassy in your country is tolerating spies from the other country, in your country. By the way, what's the number 1 and number 2 spying countries on the United States? Russia? No. People's Republic of China? No. France and Israel. Like with friends like that, who needs enemas? So, Mossadegh, the first thing he does is he throws the British embassy out. They can't overthrow him now, right? Like they did in 1906. He's learned. He was like, oh, I'm not going to do that 1906 thing where you're going to get the clergy against me and do a violent overthrow of my democracy. And then the next thing he does is he nationalizes the oil company and he renames it the National Iranian Oil Company, NIOC. And then the Brits are suddenly stuck with an oil company where they don't have their main oil resource. So now they start looking. They're looking and looking. Eventually they're going to discover oil off the coast of Scotland in the North Sea, and they rename Anglo-Iranian Oil Company British Petroleum. So if you're wondering where BP started, it started in Iran. If you're wondering why the British are so freaking out right now about Scotland's secession referendum that's this month, it's because that oil is not off the coast of England. It is off the coast of Scotland. So what happens if Scotland leaves Great Britain to that oil? And the British have said, no more BBC, no more membership in the European Union, no more English pound, you'll be on your own if you leave. And the Scots are like, yeah, but we'll have the oil. Because it won't be BP anymore, it'll be SP. Anyway. So, the Brits come to us, right? We're their best friends. Only they haven't figured out that we're actually not anymore. They come to us and they go, hey, would you go overthrow Mossadegh for us? Your embassy's still intact, right? We go, oh, Terry S. Truman, how can you don't do that? It's awful. And we refused. We refused in part because Britain has just lost Iran. Now we can start working our way in. 1952 rolls along. Who's running for president? Dwight David Eisenhower. The Brits approach him. He hasn't even won the presidency yet. They're like, hey, buddy, you want to overthrow? He says, if I win the election, it's a done deal. Adlai Stevenson had no chance. So when I win the election, I will go in there and violently overthrow, or however I have to, overthrow the Iranian government. We'll get rid of that hypocrisy. Sorry about that. That must be a real inconvenience. And so we do. In 1953, we send in Kermit Roosevelt. This is before his job with Sesame Street. Kermit Roosevelt, in case you were wondering, is the grandson of Theodore Roosevelt, the president. So just for the record, he was a CIA operative, and we put him in the country. And he actually, let me just tell you this part of the story, and then I'll stop with Iran. But it's just so cool. He gets a portion of the military. He convinces some Iranian army officers to overthrow Mossadegh. They go and they knock on his front door at night to arrest him. And Mossadegh opens the door. He's like, how can I help you? And the army officers say, we're here to arrest you. Kermit is like off in the bushes watching. And he goes, you're here to arrest me? And they go, yeah. He goes, no. You're here to be arrested. They go, what do you mean? And a bunch of army officers loyal to Mossadegh pop out of the bushes and arrest the guys that Kermit hired. And he flees, he escapes. And Eisenhower calls off the overthrow. He's like, oh, no, screw it. We shouldn't do this. And Kermit goes rogue. He's like, no. I've been assigned a task. I'm going to do this. It's my duty as an American patriot. And he goes and he meets with Norman Schwarzkopf. You're like, wow, he's that old. No, it's his dad. You know America's a hereditary aristocracy, right? You didn't know that? You're learning. It is. It's totally hereditary aristocracy. Sorry to break the news to you like this. Anyway, he goes to Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. and asks him, what do I do to overthrow this government? And it turns out Norman Schwarzkopf Sr. was actually a merchant, a businessman who had a lot of dealings with Iran. And he came up with a plan. Here was the plan. Go hire unemployed Iranian males. Put them together in marching groups with signs saying, we love Mossadegh. Have them march through the cities of Iran and then end every march by breaking windows and setting things on fire. The president's popularity, or the prime minister's popularity, will go, and eventually the Iranians will rise up and overthrow him, and it's exactly what happened. And he pulled it off, and that's how we got rid of Iran's second democracy. Isn't that cool? Took that one out. And we pushed the Shah back on them, because they had him, and then they did a democracy, but then they got him back. And then he punished Iran for the next 25 years, for the next quarter century. Just punished Iran. So back to 1958. So the United States is feeling pretty good, because, oh, by the way, we don't give Iran back to the Brits. We're like, oh, that's ours now. We're going to call it Little America. And then we started sending shipments of bleach so Iranian women could bleach their hair blonde and do nose jobs and look like American women. I'm not kidding. You look at pictures of Iranian women in the 1970s, and the nickname for Iran became Little America. And the Brits are like, wait, no, but you overthrew the democracy so we can have it back. And we're like, you just don't get it, do you? You're done. Your day is done, Dad. It's time to retire. This is ours now. We won World War II. And the Brits are like, but we fought alongside. Yeah, that was great. You toothless bastard in diapers. It's time for you to step aside. It's ours now. This is our world. We've set the Russians up as a straw man that we can point. Anything goes wrong, oh, they did it. And now we're going to dominate the world. It's perfect arrangement. And you're not in the picture. It's 1958. The revolution that we've been helping fund, the Russians have been helping fund, succeeds in taking out the king of Iraq. Iraq wants to join, initially they want to join with the United Arab Republic, which included Syria and Egypt at the time. So it'll be Syria, Egypt, and Iraq merged together, right? They're getting it done. They're putting this vision of Morocco to Iraq. They're 2 states into the 22. They're about to get the 3rd one. Iraq says, we don't want to just go in like that. We want Kuwait back. We want that part of the Basra province back. And we freak out. We use it as an excuse. We immediately send a communique to Baghdad saying that we will drop a nuclear bomb on Baghdad if they invade Kuwait. The Iraqis are like, we don't need Kuwait. It's okay. Yeah, it used to be part of us till 1900, but okay. And then, just to make sure they got the message, we invaded Lebanon. So you're like, okay, wait, I see a pattern unfolding. So 9/11 happens, and a group of Arabs, 15 Saudis, 2 Egyptians, a Lebanese guy, and an Algerian guy attack us. And so we attack Afghanistan. So we were having trouble with Iraq, so we attack Lebanon. Later on, we get in trouble in Lebanon, so we attack Grenada. You know what I mean? Like, this is an ongoing American policy. Just randomly attack a country that has nothing to do with what's going on, and you'll be okay. Like, you know, everybody's like, what should we do about Ukraine? Attack New Zealand. That's how we would keep this thing consistent. Because you don't want to mess with a good policy that's working. You know what I mean? You go, yeah, but Osama bin Laden was in Afghanistan. Turns out he wasn't. He was in Pakistan. But forget that. Let's pretend for now that he was. Why did we invade Afghanistan? What did the Afghans do? Since when is collective punishment okay? You have the right. So we get crazy one day. We decide we've had enough of lead and mercury, bad quality Chinese products, and we're going to teach the Chinese a lesson. So we move to Russia, and we plan an attack, and we unleash it in China, and we hijack airplanes and fly them into Chinese buildings. It's awful. 3,000 dead Chinese later. It's just terrible. Who does China attack? According to the American thing, some random country. In this case, it'd be Russia, because we moved there first. You know what I mean? We're from Texas. You know? They need to be attacked, maybe attacking Texas. But then, what did all the other 28 million Texans have to do with us crazy people who did this? Do you see how irrational this is? This doesn't make sense. If you just think about it for 10 minutes and you realize what we do doesn't make sense. It's random, crazy nonsense. You're like, but somebody had to get vengeance. Now we're talking. So this is about vengeance. You really badly wanted to kill a retired guy with diabetes on dialysis who was completely unimportant. And you did it. It cost us 6,000 American lives, 3 million Iraqi lives, 250,000 Afghan lives, 28,000 Pakistani lives, $2 trillion in direct money, at least another $1 trillion in indirect money that we haven't seen yet, but it's coming. And then one of the reasons we're in this depression we're in was because the economy collapsed, because wars are bad for economies. I know you've been taught they're good. There was one war that was good for an economy. It was World War II. It lasted 8 years and killed 65 million people. So if that's your formula for improving economies, I'm not on board with you. That's 8 million people a year. That's a lot of work. No wonder the economy got better. You know what I mean? Just think of the bombs and the bullets. That's dedication. Actually, I'm kind of oversimplifying because the first 4 years were pretty mild. Like 65 million people died, but maybe 15 in the first 4 years, 50 in the last 4. The last 4 is when the bloodbath really went into, it's like 12 million a year in those last 4 years. It's really 28 million Russians, 15 million Chinese. 28 million, there's 1 in 7 Russians. God. Not a good formula. Don't like it. So, Okay, so back to 1958. So we invade Lebanon. By the way, we sent in a Marine Corps unit with Confederate flags. You know how I know this? I found the picture. There's a group of Marines walking in front of a business, a Lebanese business, and there's a Confederate flag. You didn't know it, but apparently the CSA did okay. We're still here. We shoot the place up a little bit. We restore order. The Iraqis back down from unifying with the rest of the Arab world, and we sort of establish ourselves as if you keep pushing this secular socialist agenda, this pan-Arabist secular socialist agenda, we'll do really weird things like invade Lebanon and threaten to nuke Iraq. So we get this period of instability that lasts now in the aftermath of this until the 1970s. By the way, Syria too. Syria breaks away from the United Arab Republic in 1961 and then has like 9 governments by 1970. So Syria and Iraq end up in this disaster of instability. They come out of it in the 70s, and it becomes pretty clear pretty early on, probably by 1976-ish, that Saddam Hussein is really the guy in power in Iraq. I've been trying to recall the president's name at the time. Saddam Hussein wasn't the president, but he's the guy running the show. The president was sick, he was old, he wasn't really in charge. We approach him. We approach Saddam Hussein even before he's president, and it was 77 or 78, we had a list of around 800 Iraqis we didn't like. They were socialists mostly. And we just presented the list. We were like, here, see these guys? We don't like them. Can you do something about them? And he said, sure, love to. I'd love to make the United States happy. I'm looking for an alliance. And they were university professors, engineers, intelligentsia. He rounds them up. He gives them a mass trial, big trial, hundreds at a time. They're all found guilty, shockingly enough. Isn't that weird? I think at least one of them would have been innocent. Crimes against the Iraqi state, and he hangs them live on TV on all the broadcasting channels in Iraq for the whole world to see. And our immediate response is, we can work with this guy. Because we didn't tell him what to do with them. Right? He was creative. That's what you want to see in a friend. Creativity. He could have just arrested them, hid them somewhere, you know what I mean? Disappeared them. No, he made a spectacle out of it. He wanted us to know that we took him serious, that he took us seriously. A year later, 1979, Iran has a revolution, and our relationship with Iran goes away. Now, the reason they're having the revolution is to get rid of us. This isn't just a revolution to get rid of their monarchy. It's really a revolution to get rid of us. They're sick of us by this point. They're sick of the monarchy, and they're sick of the United States of America. They have a revolution. It's a toss-up between whether the communists are going to take over or whether the Islamists are going to take over. It's in the air in the opening moments of the revolution. It could go either way. They were working together, in fact, in the beginning. Well, we don't want the communists to take over because then Iran will fall into the Soviet sphere of influence. If the Islamists, if the fundamentalist Muslims take over and create a theocratic state, they will hate the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union's avowed religion is atheism. They'll hate us too, but they'll also hate the Soviet Union. In other words, our option is nobody gets Iran or the Soviets get Iran. So we decide we're going to help the Islamists win. Now the way we can do this is there was a guy, the Ayatollah Khomeini, he was in France, he goes to Iraq, basically Saddam Hussein has him. We asked Saddam Hussein to release him into Iran because he's incredibly charismatic. The Iranian people really love him. And if they can get him in Iran, he will probably flip it over to the Islamist side. And of course, that's exactly what happens. The Islamists win. They create the Islamic State, known as the Islamic Republic of Iran. They mass arrest the communists, by the way, murder them. A bunch of them flee, ironically enough, to here. They go to Europe and the United States, ironically enough. I actually know an ex-communist Iranian here. I probably know more, because I know a few Iranians, but I know one for sure was, and he fled because he was going to be murdered. And then, in an act of vengeance, we go to the Iraqis. We go to the Iraqis, and we go, we know you have a claim for the Arab part of Iran. That's the oil-rich region, Khuzestan, where the Anglo-Persian oil company went in 1901, 1902. All right? Iraq claimed it, and the reason Iraq claimed it is Iraq is an Arab state, Iran is a Persian state, but that part of Iran, Khuzestan, is Arab, so Arabs should rule Arabs, right? So we go, we will back your claim. We will back your claim. We will back you invading Iran. We will support you. We will equip you with the latest and most modern equipment. All you got to do is invade Iran and beat them for us. And Saddam Hussein goes, Iran's 3 times bigger than Iraq. 3 times the population, 3 times the land. How are we going to take Iran? And we go, with our back. And so Iraq actually invades Iran as a proxy for the US. And they end up fighting an 8-year-long war. It ends in 1989. Kills about 750,000 Iranians and about 250,000 Iraqis. We provided the Iraqis with night vision goggles. We provided them with jet planes. We provided them with missiles. We provided them with just about everything you can imagine, including gas. We gave them VX gas, mustard gas, sarin gas. We gave the Iraqis gas, and the Iraqis used it all over the Iranian army. It's one of the reasons why Iraq held out, because the Iranian army was 3 times bigger than the Iraqi army, and the way that the Iraqis held out for the 8 years was because Iraq attacked, but then immediately went on the defensive. It was a mistake. It was a disaster. The Iraqis did not have a chance to defeat Iran. The intelligence they were given was absolutely horrid. We told them that the Iranian military was decapitated. They would never be able to get on their feet in time. It's wrong. Wrong, wrong, wrong. The Iraqi military penetrated just a few miles into Iran before they were stopped. They just stopped cold. It was like they ran into a brick wall. And they were quickly driven out of Iran, and the next 8 years was just basically trench gas warfare, just like World War I. The Iraqis and the Iranians finally decided they'd had enough. Actually, really, it was Ayatollah Khomeini. Saddam Hussein early on said, I'd like to end the war, and Ayatollah Khomeini said, no, this has turned into a holy war. You're a secular socialist bastard. We're going to destroy you because we want to create an Islamic state that'll be pan-Arab as well as pan-Iranian, and it'll stretch across the Middle East, and you're the first step towards that. And then eventually, Ayatollah Khomeini went, okay, this is a stupid war, let's back out. And in 1989, it quit. In 89, both states are in significant debt. Iran and Iraq are both in significant debt, but they have a lot of oil. So this should be an easy recovery for both states. Iraq has actually gone through a major transformation socially because it sent all its engineers, all its doctors, its university professors to the front line to fight the Iranians. They were its officer corps. So man, there was these huge vacuums in their workforce that needed to be filled. When the United States sent men to war in World Wars I and II, how did we fill the vacuum? Women, and then immediately threw them out of the workforce as soon as the men came back, right? We even had a female baseball league in World War II, and then immediately got rid of it. The men are back. All right, no more. Stop. You're creeping us out. Every time you swing the bat, it just drives us nuts. The same thing has happened to Iraq. Iraq was a secular state, so it was no problem for women to enter the workforce. Enter the workforce and enter politics. By 1990, Iraq's parliament was 34% women. In the United States, the US Congress was 2% women. There were women engineers, women university professors, women MDs in Iraq. Women had become an important part of the Iraqi political and economic system. Iraq was looking like it was going to come out of the Iran-Iraq war with a tyrant. Saddam Hussein is a tyrant. There's no two ways about it, right? There's no way to measure it any other way. Like, you just look at what he did in the late 70s with that list of 800 people. A little bit of a jerk. But internally, the rest of the state looked really good. It looked very promising. Arabs were looking to Iraq and going, that might be the way forward. Get rid of Saddam Hussein, the rest of it. That might be the way forward. Iraq and Iran show up at an OPEC meeting and they go, we're in trouble because of our debt, because of the stupid war we just did against each other. We would really like some help. They negotiated, and OPEC came up with a really good deal. All the OPEC states, which include, by the way, countries like Venezuela and Indonesia, they're not all Arab. Iran is into Arab, right? All these OPEC states agree to lower their production while Iraq and Iran increase their production. And they'll increase by the exact amount that the other states have lowered their production by, which will mean that the price will be the same. Only Iraq and Iran's share of the oil market will be larger, and then that will allow them to bring in more revenue to clean up their debt. And then once they're on their feet again, they'll go back to the old division of the oil markets. And it's not great for Indonesia and Venezuela because they're kind of poor countries, but countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE don't care. Whatever. Okay, yeah, so I can't have a solid silver car and an indoor ski jump ramp in the desert till later. I'll have to do that later. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a big deal. So everybody's excited. They think, okay, this is great. We'll do this. They agree, they sign, they walk out of the room, and sure enough, oil prices go. They just crash, they plummet. By 1990, they're record lows. And Iraq and Iran are like, oh, wait, what happened? What's going on? It means somebody's flooding the market with oil. Somebody's cheating. Somebody's breaking the deal. So they start trying to figure out who's doing it. In the meantime, Iraq has noticed that it's got oil fields on the border with Kuwait where the oil levels are dropping dramatically. Way unexpected. Much more than Iraq is pumping out. Now, some of those oil fields were oil fields that were on both sides of the border, right? The Iraq-Kuwaiti border went right through the oil field. Well, when that happens, the two states have treaties for those oil fields. They actually sat down and negotiated how much each country could pump out per day. That way, right, because it's a fluid, if one side pumps out more than the other side, it doesn't do this, right? It just, the whole thing goes down. So to make it so that each side got a fair share, you have to figure out how much each side can pump out per day. And the Iraqis noticed that those fields are going down way faster than they should be. So clearly the Kuwaitis are pumping more oil than they should, which means they're stealing. This is theft. So Iraq immediately sends a communique to Kuwait and says, hey, we think you're stealing from the joint oil fields, please stop. And the Kuwait, of course, completely ignores the communique. And then it continues to happen. So the Iraqis go, Saddam Hussein says, I'd like the UN to come in and inspect, because I'm pretty sure Kuwait's stealing our oil. We want an objective third party to come look. The UN goes, and they look, and it's true, Kuwait was stealing the oil. No doubt about it. But it's even better than that. So the UN inspectors noticed that there were Kuwaiti oil rigs in parts of Kuwait where there were no known oil fields in Kuwait. But they were really close to Iraqi oil fields that were entirely in Iraq. And the UN inspectors were like, that doesn't make sense. So they go and they investigate. It turns out the Kuwaitis were slant drilling under the border into Iraq and actually pumping out Iraqi oil. So they're not just stealing in a way that's a little iffy. They were outright stealing. And then taking all that stolen Iraqi oil and flooding the market with it, crashed the price so Iraq couldn't pay off its debt. Saddam Hussein goes, how's this not an act of warfare? You're stealing our oil and then using it to flood the market to crash the price so that we can't get back on our feet. And he starts complaining really loudly. Middle of summer of 1990, the complaining is like screaming. Kuwaitis ignore it. They just ignore it. So Saddam Hussein in July 1990, I want to say it was July 24th. It was right around then. Maybe it was 23rd, 25th. give or take a couple of days. There is, by the way, a sign-in, and not that computer. Matt has the computers. Are you going to set them up back there? So you don't have to do a sign-in sheet because I won't take it. You'll sign into the computer. And we'll need to edit this out. So, where was I? Saddam Hussein is complaining. He finally brings in, around July 23rd, he finally brings in the U.S. ambassador. Her name is April Glasby, so you can look this up. So you never trust anything anybody tells you. Always look everything up. He brings in April Glasby, and he sits her down across from him, and he says, United States and Iraq are very good friends. And she goes, yes, that's true. By the way, in 1983, Donald Rumsfeld flew to Iraq, put his arm around Saddam Hussein's waist, pulled him really close to him, and said, Saddam Hussein is a very good friend of the United States. Right, just so we're clear. He goes, the United States is a very good friend of Iraq. We really love the United States. We're happy about this relationship. And she says, yes, that's true. We are good friends. Right? We've been through thick and thin with Iraq by this point. The Iran-Iraq war and all the gas weapons that we sent them. When the Iraqis gassed Halabja and killed, 1,800 Kurds in the village of Halabja, we did the cover-up. We sent Jeane Kirkpatrick from the Reagan administration to go blame the Iranians. We did. We blamed the Iranians, who didn't use any gas during the whole war, just for the record. So it was really weird to blame the side that wasn't using gas, but we did. And of course, the American public eats up stuff like that because you don't go investigate, double check things, right? You just accept, which is weird. Why? I don't understand. Why would you trust them? Anyone, just look it up. Especially nowadays, it's just a Wikipedia search away. The most reliable maybe not the most reliable, but you know what I mean? You can start there. You don't have to end there. So, he says, we're having trouble with Kuwait. They're stealing our oil and they're flooding the market with it. She goes, the United States clearly believes Kuwait is in the wrong on this. He says, they are ignoring all our attempts to get them to stop. She goes, yeah, we really don't know what their deal is. He goes, we're going to have to do something about it since they're ignoring our attempts to get them to stop. In other words, Saddam Hussein is asking for permission to invade Kuwait, right? We're going to have to do something about it. What would that look like? Throw stones across the border? You know, he's saying, we're invading Kuwait. There's no two ways to see this. We're gonna have to do something. She says, what happens between Arab states is of no concern to the United States. Kuwait's Arab, Iraq is Arab. Bing, green light, go. And he does. He goes a few days later. He sends in the Republican Guard. The Republican Guard were elite troops. Elite troops, 8 years of battle hardening on the front against Iran, and against an army 3 times bigger. These are no joke. These guys are decent soldiers. By decent, I don't mean good. No, I do mean good. By decent, I don't mean moral. There we go. That's the word. But troops like this are really good at obeying orders. So if you send elite troops like this into a place and you go, destroy everything, murder everybody, rape everything that moves, they will. That's exactly what they will do. If you send them in and say, don't mess with anything, leave it all intact, I want it clean, don't shoot the place up, no raping, they won't. Because they're elite troops. Regular troops, you tell them, don't go mess the place up. There's going to be bullet holes everywhere, burning cars, raped women. There's a reason he sends his Republican Guard. He doesn't want to just punish Kuwait. He wants to annex it back. This is an old Iraqi wound. He wants to fix it. He wants to bring Kuwait back into the fold intact. He doesn't want to damage it. It would be like, let's say Houston broke away, became its own state, and then 90 years later, we decide to re-annex it. We're not going to go into the place and shoot it up and kill it. Well, we might because we're Americans. Let me think. Hold on. let me find a better, okay, let's pretend we still loved Houston and Houstonians. We're not going to go into the place and shoot the place up because they're us. We're just putting us back together, right? And so they didn't. There were probably incidences, I've never read any documented ones, but you got to assume something went wrong. Having said that, the press goes nuts, and they start reporting that the Iraqis went into a hospital, went into the incubator room where the babies were, pulled the babies out. The Iraqis are Arabs, the Kuwaitis are Arabs. Why would they do this to themselves? It makes no sense. And skewered them on the end of bayonets and marched through the streets. Just why? And it turns out she was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. She also claimed that the Iraqis were raping all the airline attendants. Turns out, why airline attendants? Like, why not restaurant workers too? You know, like, oh, you work for an airline? All right, come with me, lady. It just seems so random. Oh, no, you're a waitress? Fine, you can stay. It turns out she was a member of the Kuwaiti royal family. It turns out she was lying. She admitted it later. It turns out that the CIA had contacted her and asked her to fabricate the story. And the press, of course, ate it up. And none of that ever happened. It just didn't happen. The war, the invasion of Kuwait, took about 24 hours. Mostly because it took that long for the Kuwaiti military to scamper out of the country. Right? They ran into Saudi Arabia as fast as they could. The only reason it took that long is it just took that long for them to run away. So the whole war was an incredibly unviolent event. The Kuwaiti royal family escaped. You know, members of the top-ranked members of the Kuwaiti bureaucracy escaped. Saddam Hussein then immediately annexed Kuwait, declared that it was the 19th province, told the bureaucracy that existed, you're now the provincial bureaucracy, you're not a state bureaucracy anymore, welcome to Iraq. Told the businessmen in Kuwait, you stay where you are, nobody move, you keep your business, you keep running, we're just going to use Iraqi rules. For example, women now have rights. No more of this Kuwaiti nonsense. Also, Kuwait was 1.5 million people in 1990. It was 1.5 million people, 500,000 citizens, 1 million foreigners. The foreigners had essentially no rights. So the first thing that the Iraqis did was they gave the 1 million foreigners rights. If you were an Arab, you could immediately apply for Iraqi citizenship. If you were not an Arab, you could still apply, but the process would take longer. It wouldn't be as instantaneous. But by the way, there was no possibility of citizenship for that million people under the Kuwaiti system because foreigners had no rights in that system. There was no way. I think marriage maybe was a way, but other than marriage, there was no way to become a citizen. In other words, in Kuwait, as far as human rights go, Saddam Hussein was a step up. Iraq was a step up from Kuwait. The ruler of Kuwait actually dissolved parliament in 1986. He said, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of having to deal with people. I'm going to just rule directly. Right? So how's that any different than tyranny? Having one person just rule directly. Right? So this is actually a step in the right direction. There you go, but Saddam Hussein was horrible. That's true. But compared to the Kuwaitis, he was just fine. And George Bush Sr.'s initial response when he first goes out onto the press and addresses the U.S. population, he says, at this moment, I see nothing wrong with the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, but I'm going to look into the matter further. Next thing you know, he flies to Aspen. Margaret Thatcher, Prime Minister of Great Britain, flies to Aspen. They meet for 2 days. They come out, and George Bush Sr. goes, Saddam Hussein's a Hitler. He's a Hitler. 1,000 points of light. He's a Hitler. Hitler. He's actually not. He was a Hussein. And the next thing you know, we're doing Desert Shield. In other words, we took back the permission, but after the fact. Desert Shield, we go into Saudi Arabia slowly. Unbelievably slowly. It basically takes us 4 months to deploy our military to Saudi Arabia. The 82nd Airborne goes in first. piece by piece. And Saddam Hussein just sits there and watches us deploy. Just, well, look, another unit going in. If he really was the nasty bastard that everybody made him out to be, at least on the international stage, and he knew we were going to eventually attack him. We were saying we were, so why wouldn't he know? Let's say he knew, he understood that we were eventually going to attack him. What he should have done was waited until about half the 82nd Airborne was deployed into Saudi Arabia and then immediately attacked, because the Saudi military would have stood up against the Iraqi military for a whole of 37 seconds. Right? The Iraqi military compared to the Saudis were a joke. So the only thing that would have been there that would have been able to stop him from overrunning Saudi Arabia was our 82nd Airborne, but only half deployed. And he would have overrun that too because he had a massive army. If he really was the little bastard, he would not have let us deploy over 4 months, put our whole military in there, bring all the aircraft carriers we wanted, and then just let us start bombing the crap out of him. He actually flew the Air Force to Iran. Ironically enough, he actually sent the Iraqi Air Force to Iran. He just didn't want to blow it up. There's no way to stand up to our Air Force, right? So why get it blown up? He just flew it to Iran. Irans were like, thanks for the gift. Good luck, you'll never see that again. We do an air war. It takes about 4 weeks to conduct the air war. After it took us 4 months to deploy, it took 4-week air war. In that 4 weeks, we dropped more tonnage of explosives on Iraq, a relatively small country, we're not talking about a big place, than all the explosives dropped in World War II, all 8 years, including both nuclear bombs. In 4 weeks, we dropped more tonnage of explosives on Iraq than in 8 years of World War II, where 65 million people were killed and 2 nukes were dropped. We smashed Iraq into the Stone Ages, Ted Cruz. Right? Senator Ted Cruz said we need to smash Iraq into the Stone Age. Again? How many times are we going to do that? It's why we're in the situation we're in now. It's because we did it twice already. You're going to do it a third time? What do you have against the Iraqis? What horrible thing did they do in a previous life that God is punishing them now? Because they sure as hell didn't do anything in this life. They never attacked the U.S. They never threatened to attack the U.S. They didn't have the means to attack the U.S. In fact, they were our ally who asked us permission to invade Kuwait, and we gave it to them. And we still smashed them into the Stone Age. We blew up every bridge. We blew up every pharmaceutical plant. We blew up their schools. We blew up their police departments. We blew up their hospitals. We obliterated them. We killed probably around 200,000 people in 4 weeks. Somewhere between 100 and 200,000. And then withdrew. We did a ground war. It took 5 days. We went in for 5 days and we were like, and got out. The Iraqi military, when we started the ground war, the Iraqi military tried to surrender. They actually said, we surrender. It wasn't just they tried to surrender. They surrendered. They officially surrendered. Saddam Hussein sent a communique to George Bush Sr. We surrender, the day the ground war started. He said, no, I don't accept your surrender. He sent another communique. Mr. President, we surrender. We were never in this fight. No one can stand up to the United States. We're a country of 25 million people. How do we fight you? We surrender. We asked permission. What are you doing? And we said no. He called up Mikhail Gorbachev, right? The Soviet leader. Saddam Hussein did. And he said, we're surrendering. We're surrendering. And he said, okay, I'll call up the President of the United States and see what I can do. So the Soviet leader gets on the phone with President George Bush Sr. and says, the Iraqis have surrendered. In their name, we're conveying the surrender to you. And George Bush Sr. said, we're not taking. And we went ahead and conducted the 5-day war. Saddam Hussein said, there's no point in you guys dying. Ordered the withdrawal of his military. He said, just get the hell out of Kuwait. Come home. Defend Iraq, but get out of Kuwait. So the Iraqi army in Kuwait grabbed every vehicle they could find. Every little car, motorcycle, bus, truck. They commandeered them and they got on the Basra highway, the Kuwait-Basra highway, and they took off as fast as they could to Basra. So we came in with A-10s and just burned them alive. We just frickin' set the highway on fire and burned the surrendering, retreating army. For no reason. They had already lost the war and surrendered multiple times. If you want, there's a Google search away, you can find scorched Iraqi bodies. There was a journalist there, he took pictures. So you don't have to believe it. In the aftermath, George Bush Sr. told Iraq, you have to give up Kuwait. You have to, on paper, say you will relinquish all claims to Kuwait. Done. Saddam Hussein did it. He went into Parliament and he said, Iraq, we need to relinquish all claims to Kuwait so that we don't get attacked again. And then George Bush Sr. said, and give up all your weapons of mass destruction. Okay, I'm not going to quibble over the definition of weapons of mass destruction, but just for the record, chemical weapons are not weapons of mass destruction. Biological and nuclear weapons are weapons of mass destruction. And by the way, conventional weapons can totally be used as weapons of mass destruction. When we firebombed Dresden, for example, we probably killed at least 30,000 people in one night. Now, if you run across the number 100,000, that's the high number. I'm using the low number just because it's my nature. Right? I like to use low numbers because it's easier to defend them. There's some controversy about the 100,000 number, so just use the 30,000. It's enough! You know what I mean? Like, I know you want it to be 100 because that's a cool number, but 30,000 dead people, all civilians. Dresden had no military value. It was not a military target. We firebombed it just to kill civilians in World War II. We, as in the United States Army Air Corps, we just went in. But with the rumor is that the fire got so hot it created a backdraft, and as people were running away, the backdraft was sucking them back into the flames. You couldn't run away from the fire. You were sucked back in, which is why there were so many dead. There was no way to escape. Right? Yeah, that was conventional weapons. That wasn't a nuke. So technically, gas. You're like, well, gas. Can't you? No. Here's why. First of all, it's an airy thing. So if it's too windy, or there's some gases are heavier than air, so they drop. They're great for trenches, right? Because then they'll roll into the trenches. You can don gas masks. There's all sorts of ways to deal with it. By the way, uric acid will counteract a lot of the gas. It's probably not a real big difficulty if you're in a gas attack to pee, right? Because you probably already have. And you just reach in, rip your underwear off, and tie it around your mouth, and you diminish the damage being done to your lungs. Seriously, that was the original gas mask in World War I, right? Because it's sort of like automatic. Oh, I think I peed myself. That's perfect. And then, tie it off. That's one time when that biological response is the right one. Because you got to figure most of the time it's probably not. It's just inconvenient. Damn it. I'm scared. Why am I peeing myself? Like, what was that? How did that evolve? That you're being chased by a leopard and you pee yourself. The leopard's like, oh, I'm not going to eat you now. Oh, you peed yourself? Stink. I'm sure the leopard could drag you to a river and dunk you in it and leave you there for a little while and come back and eat you. Especially since, anyway, so. So, I'm not going to quibble. We're going to go ahead and accept that chemical weapons are weapons of mass destruction. Here, let me give you a fun stat. World War I, somewhere around 12.5 to 13.5 million people died, right? About 150,000 to chemical weapons. You know what I mean? Like at that point, if you could ask, no, hey, can we just not do conventional? Let's just do chemical? You should. Because if somebody said, we're just going to kill 150,000 people, or we could do 12.5 million, you should kind of go with the 150, I'm thinking. So just to give you an idea what chemical weapons are is they're a terror weapon, because they're really scary. The idea that there's going to be a gas, a cloud, a vapor that you're going to suck into your lungs and it's going to burn your lungs and it's going to be a horrible death. That's a terror weapon. That causes soldiers to jump out of trenches and take off running. That's what that is. But anyway, so, okay, fine. We'll call it a WMD to make George Bush Sr. happy. He said Iraq needs to get rid of them. How did we know they had them? We're the ones that provided them. those weapons that they used in the Iran-Iraq War that they never used against us when we were bombing them into the Stone Age in 1991. They could have. Well, they could have put them on Scuds and started lobbing, because they were lobbing Scuds, but they were using conventional warheads. They weren't using chemical weapons on us. They never did. But they could have. They had them. We gave them to them. George Bush Sr. said, get rid of your chemical weapons, renounce Kuwait, and we will end the embargo we had in place. We cut Iraq off. We shut off all its trade with the rest of the world. Completely. They couldn't sell oil. They couldn't buy food. They couldn't buy medicine. I don't mean we partially shut them off. We completely isolated Iraq in 1990. And Senior said, I'll lift that if you get rid of your chemical weapons and renounce your claims to Kuwait. So Saddam Hussein obliged. He renounced Kuwait, and then in August of 1991, took all his chemical weapons into various parts of the desert and blew them up. UN weapons inspection regime arrives. Eventually it will be a guy named Scott Ritter in charge, a Marine, U.S. Marine, colonel, if I remember correctly, and a self-proclaimed conservative. Right? So we're not talking some kind of crazy bleeding heart liberal who shows up and starts talking, poor Iraqis. This guy is kind of tough. He's a Marine and he's a conservative, so it's, you don't expect him to have any sympathy for the Iraqis. Turns out the Marines are probably more sympathetic to the Iraqis than the Army, but that's a different story. If you know Marines and you know Army, go to them and talk to them about their experiences in Iraq. And I've noticed, it's totally anecdotal, so it could be completely wrong. I've noticed Marines tend to like Arabs and soldiers tend not to. But anyway, he gets there and he tells the Iraqis, okay, what are the weapons of mass destruction? Let's go ahead and get them. And the Iraqis go, we don't have any. And he whips out the receipts with the serial numbers. Because you have this many VX gas rockets. You have this many mustard gas. You have this many, right? Sarin gas. You have all this. We're the ones who gave it. Look, we have the receipts. And the Iraqis are like, yeah, we did have those. All right, let's see them. No, did. Past tense. What do you mean? We blew them up. You blew them up? Yeah. You told us get rid of them. So we took them out in the desert and we blew them up. We blew them up in August. You mean last August you blew them up? Yeah, we blew them all up. Why did you do that for? You have to give them to us. We have to give them to you? People will see Made in USA on it. You want that? I don't know, I'll say Made in China. We thought we were supposed to get rid of them so that you wouldn't get caught having supplied them to us. He's like, you dumbasses. Where'd you blow them up? So they drive out into the desert to one of the sites. I don't know how many sites, a bunch of sites. And sure enough, there's metal debris everywhere. They're in their suits, because who knows? And they're walking around, and there's metal debris everywhere, and you can see where stuff was blown up. There's little blast marks on the ground. And so Scott Ritter and his UN inspectors would get out a colander and sift the sand. I'm sure they had something more sophisticated colander. And sift the sand. And they'd find bits of metal, and what they were looking for was the serial numbers. And they do that for 6 years. Going from blast site to blast site, sifting the sand, looking for the serial numbers, for the rockets that we provided. And also going to places that Saddam Hussein might have converted to production, to make his own weapons. So he would go, he'd say, I want to inspect this building here, because I think you could be making gas weapons. And Saddam Hussein would always do this. He'd go, no. And Scott would go, I can't give you the green. Okay, fine. And they would go. And they would go through the building, and he would go, nope, not doing it. Turned out every single building Scott Ritter went to, not a single one of them had a production facility. Never found a production facility for gas weapons. By 1998, Ritter had found 98, easy to remember, 1998, 98% of all the serial numbers. Think about how amazing that is. You know, we're talking about a little piece of metal with a serial number on it. He found 98% of the serial numbers by 1998. He was about to declare Iraq free of weapons of mass destruction after 6 years. He was ready to do it. He was just a couple of facilities away from doing it. He needed to inspect 1 or 2 facilities, and then Bill Clinton ordered the UN weapons inspection regime out of Iraq. And Ritter goes, "Wait, Mr. President, I'm almost done." He goes, "Get out now, we're going to bomb." And he gets out, we bomb Iraq again, and then Saddam Hussein goes, "That's it, I'm not playing your game. It's been 6 years. He almost declared us free and clear, and you bombed us for no reason." I'll tell you what the reason was, the official reason. The official reason was that an Iraqi radar unit locked on to a U.S. jet flying over Iraqi airspace. So we bombed Iraq. Oh my God, they locked on their radar. Not a missile, not a weapon system. They just noticed it. They noticed the plane on radar. And our plane picked it up and reported back, "I've been locked on." And so we bombed them and ended the weapons inspection regime. Saddam Hussein wouldn't let them return. He said, "I'm done with you guys. You're playing games with me. You clearly have no intention of letting us go. You're going to keep these sanctions in place forever. You've made it clear." One of the side effects of the first war was we used depleted uranium shells to blow up Iraq's armor. Depleted uranium sounds harmless because it's depleted. It's not. It's completely radioactive. It's depleted because it's missing uranium-235. In nature, uranium occurs mostly as 238. 238 isn't very useful to us. It can be. I believe you can upgrade it to plutonium, but 235 is the stuff you make nuclear bombs out of. So what you do is you separate the 238 out. You get rid of a bunch of it, and keep as much 235 as possible, so you can make nukes out of it or run nuclear power plants. And what do you do with the extra 238 that you got sitting around? Well, it turns out it's a really dense, heavy metal, and that's great for making weapons that destroy steel. So in the mid-1980s, when we were first playing with these depleted uranium shells, the Department of Defense said that we should never, under any circumstances, use depleted uranium shells in a combat situation with American soldiers on the ground, because they'll be irradiated. And of course, that's exactly what we did in '91. We used depleted uranium shells while we had American soldiers on the ground. Well, that end, all over South Iraq, where there are Iraqis living there. Turns out, for example, that the cancer rate in southern Iraq is through the roof. But while the sanctions were in place, Iraq was not allowed to import anything initially. Eventually, they did the oil for food program, but any type of cancer treatment wasn't allowed to be imported in. So Iraq now has, because of the depleted uranium, cancer rates through the roof, but they can't import chemo. They can't import radiation therapy. They can't import the types of drugs they need because they're just blocked. They couldn't even import X-ray machines. Iraq could basically import acetaminophen and some food. George Bush Jr. gets elected, and then we get 9/11. Immediately after 9/11, the Bush administration starts talking about invading Iraq. Immediately after nobody from Iraq attacked us on 9/11, he starts talking about invading Iraq. And he starts framing it as finishing Dad's unfinished business. And we do. We attack in 2003. Doesn't take us long to get there. In 2002, after Labor Day, so right about this time of the year, we began a mass ad campaign. The Bush administration began a mass ad campaign to convince the American people to get on board. And so what they would do is they would go, Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein. Right? They would put the names together in every sentence they could. The two men were opposites, polar opposites. One was a secular, tyrannical socialist who he wasn't a very good socialist, but he was a socialist. And then on the other side, there was Osama bin Laden, who was a fundamentalist, not secularist, right? Didn't care, socialism, schmocialism, he just wants fundamentalist society, and they hated each other's guts so much, at least I'm assuming that's what this means, that Osama bin Laden actually put a $10 million hit on Saddam Hussein. I don't think a friend would do that. I'm just guessing. Not $10 million, 100 maybe. You know what I mean? You're gonna make sure that everybody knows you really value that guy's life. We actually tried to collect. We could. We did. And Al-Qaeda responded no. Actually, I don't think they responded at all. I think they ignored our request. In that build-up, George Bush Sr. began saying that he did not need to go to Congress to do a war against Iraq, and he did not need to go to the UN to do a war against Iraq. But there was a little bit of outcry amongst the political class, the political elites. And eventually he did go to Congress and got permission. And he did go to the UN and did not get permission. The UN said, go to hell. Having said that, he then put together a coalition of the willing, which included countries like Fiji, Tonga, Mongolia, Iceland sent one woman. Who else was in the coalition of the willing? I'm serious, Iceland sent a woman. They sent one soldier. She's a weightlifter, and she can pick up a car. So in case they needed to do that while in Iraq, they had a person who could. So that was the coalition. It was really special. Japan sent soldiers. That was great, right? Because they had to break the constitution to do it. Their constitution strictly forbids any type of offensive action. This is clearly a word. Germany, France, and Belgium came out and said, please, United States, don't do this. Don't do this. And then Germany added, we did this. It's called 1939. We attacked Poland. A country that didn't attack us, didn't have the means to attack us, didn't threaten to attack us. And look at what, don't do this. You're the United States. The whole world looks up to you. So we cut off relations. George Bush refused to talk to Gerhard Schröder, the Chancellor of Germany. It was it. Until Gerhard Schröder was replaced by Angela Merkel, Germany and the United States did not talk again. Right? Because that's what you do with your friends. When your friends give you advice and you don't like it, you just cut them off. Get rid of them. Because that's a mature response. This is Germany, Belgium, and France. They're like NATO members. They're our allies. And they're like, please don't do this. And we do it anyway. We go in, we call the initial attack. By the way, the original operation was Operation Iraqi Liberty, which goes onto your orders as OIL. And then I guess somebody noticed that. So they switched it to Freedom because that was just too embarrassing. What we call the initial operation shock and awe. What's the definition of terror? The state of having shock and awe. Our initial operation against the Iraqis, we named it terrorism. Our war against terrorism, what do? We attack a country that never attacked us at all, ever. And we call our operation terrorism. It's like we were just letting the whole world know that we didn't believe anything. The whole world knew there were no weapons of mass destruction. And George Bush Jr. was screaming, there are weapons of mass destruction. Here's what Cheney did. Cheney had somebody in his office release to the New York Times a leak. Isn't that weird how there's always leaks? How come that guy doesn't get fired? So somebody leaked to the New York Times that there was categorical evidence. In other words, it was absolutely certain, 100%, not 99, not 99.9, 100% certain that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction still. So the New York Times ran it. Anonymous source in Bush administration says that Iraq absolutely has weapons of mass destruction. Next day, the press comes up to Dick Cheney and goes, how do you know, Mr. Vice President, that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction? And he said, I read it in the New York Times yesterday.
Oh my God.
The New York Times did apologize for this, I think in 2006, if I remember correctly. It was on page 6. They said, We were duped by the Bush administration. We went along willingly with it, and we became their pawns in the build-up for the war. We fell on our job. Our job was to check, double-check, confirm, right? And we didn't do any of that. We just went along for the ride, and we're really sorry. Because, right, the New York Times is the newspaper of record. That's supposed to be the historical record for the United States. And so for them to do this is just a hideous betrayal of us. That, and they had a guy who was just making up stories, in case you didn't know. Just making it up out of thin air. He's like a fiction writer, writing articles for them. And that he was doing that for years. Like, so maybe we need a new official historical record keeper. Anyway, so we go into Iraq, we smash the place up all over again, and we capture it. It's a pretty quick war. George Bush Jr. never said mission accomplished. He never did, just for the record. However, behind him on the aircraft carrier that he lands his airplane on, there's a big banner that says mission accomplished. So I don't think he needed to, because there was that banner saying mission accomplished. Now we have some really interesting choices. Saddam Hussein is missing. We don't know where he is. We've got a government. The Iraqi government was still intact. You know, the generals, the top people are running every which direction, hiding from us. The top politicians, the vice president, for example, is on the run. Everybody's on the run at the top. But the government apparatus itself is still intact. There's still a police. There's an army. There's a bureaucracy. There is the Ministry of Oil, the Ministry of Antiquities, right? The Iraqis had a socialized food distribution network. And that's how when we cut off their food imports, the way they survived is they had a state apparatus that kept track of every calorie. Right? In the United States, half the food that we produce, we throw in the garbage. In Iraq, I bet it was 5% got in the garbage. Because they had this system that just kept track of everything so they could survive. How is that not an act of genocide, cutting off people's food? Right? This is a nasty thing to do. And so the Iraqis have overcome it. All that's intact. It didn't get, some of the buildings are blown up, but the state, the Iraqi state, is still intact. George Bush Jr. grabs a guy named Paul Bremer. Paul Bremer has zero knowledge about the Middle East. In fact, he was given a 2-week crash course. So he had 2 weeks of training. The only thing he knows about the Middle East is the crap that you sort of pick up just by watching Fox or CNN or whatever. He watches Fox. Paul Bremer has never tried to rebuild a state. He's never run a state before. His qualification for taking over Iraq, because that's what we did, we installed an American to run Iraq after we conquered the country. Isn't that weird? Couldn't find an Iraqi anywhere that could do this. His only qualification was he was the kind of conservative George Bush Jr. liked. His only qualification was he was pro-gun rights, pro-states' rights, he was against abortion, and he wanted to cut taxes for the rich. So they made him in command of Iraq. It's insane. He makes one hideous, incompetent, disastrous, moronic, that's right, Paul, I'm calling you a moron, decision after the other. And if you want, I'll debate you. They dissolved the police. They dissolved the army. They dissolved the bureaucracy except for the Ministry of Oil. In fact, the only thing we put Marines in front of was the Ministry of Oil. The Ministry of Antiquities was right next door. It gets looted. Because we didn't think that protecting the antiquities of a 6,000-year-old civilization was worth putting a dozen Marines in front of that building. They had documents from the Ottoman Empire period. They had antiquities from 6,000 years ago. They just gone, disappeared, spilled in the street. The papers from the Ottoman Empire period were floating down the street because the looters didn't know they were valuable. 12 Marines and you could have secured that building. The only building we secured was the Ministry of Oil. Now, all of a sudden, the Iraqi state is gone because you've gotten rid of the police, you've gotten rid of the army, and you've gotten rid of the bureaucracy. And all those people hate our guts because they've just lost their job, they're trained, they're armed, and they're thinking, we got to get the United States out of the country. By 2004, we have a full-fledged uprising on our hands. Initially, when we went in, there wasn't much going on. There was a little bit here or there. There was really very little going on. We were so incompetent. Paul Bremer was such a moron. The Bush administration were made up of such incompetent morons that within a year we have a full-scale uprising on our hands, and we're now in the midst of a civil war revolution against us. We're the enemy. And the guys who are fighting us are in fact the guys we just fired that we could have used. We could have left the police intact and the army intact and the bureaucracy intact and just kept running Iraq until we could step away and give a civilian. Attacking Iraq to begin with is stupid. I'm just saying, now that we did it, what could you have done that wouldn't be dumber? Dismantling the Iraqi state was just, it'll go down in history as proof that the American empire should just never have existed. That we were just too small-brained to do this. You know, squirrel brain. Squirrels are funny, but they're not smart. So, we end up in this uprising. The uprising goes on for years. By 2004, Al-Qaeda in Iraq exists. There was an Al-Qaeda force in Iraq prior to 2004, just for the clarity of this. In fact, Colin Powell says, we know there's an Al-Qaeda camp in northern Iraq. Do you know how we knew? Because we were working with them. While we were fighting Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, we were actually funneling Al-Qaeda in Iraq money and weapons. I'm serious. Well, they go away, and they get replaced by a new Al-Qaeda in 2004, and those guys are now recruiting from the army and the police and the bureaucracy, and they're fighting us tooth and nail. And it's an absolutely full-on, vicious, brutal war at this point. The death toll is through the roof. And most of the dead are Iraqi, but that's a problem, because supposedly we're making Iraq a better place. By around 2006, things start to turn around for us a little bit. And it's because we end up with a thing called the Sunni Awakening. In 2006, what we do is we come up with this clever idea. Instead of fighting the Iraqi insurgents, why not deliver pallets of money? You know a pallet, like the wooden pallet? We literally had forklifts pick up pallets of money, and we would put them on trucks and drive these pallets of money to the Iraqi warlords we were fighting, and we just buy them off. And they go, a couple of $1 million in hard U.S. currency? All right, I'll stop shooting at you. And then they started thinking, oh, the U.S. is going to pull out. It's just a matter of years. All we got to do is be patient. In fact, we started talking to them about this. We knew we'd lost. We'd lost the Iraq War by 2004. We can't admit it, right? We've lost all sorts of wars. We've lost Red Cloud's War. We lost the invasion of Russia in the Russian Civil War. You know, we've lost wars. We just can't admit it to ourselves. Technically, we lost the War of 1812 to Canada. But that's just too painful to acknowledge, so we won't. Right? It's our nature. We like to lie to ourselves. And in the midst of this, we start talking to these Iraqis and we go, look, if you just stop blowing stuff up for a while, we can claim victory and then we'll pull out and then you can just smash the place to pieces. And so they do. They get on board. By around 2006, 2007, these Iraqis start to come on board and they wipe out Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They destroy them. And the Al-Qaeda guys end up having to flee, and many of them end up in Syria by 2008. In 2011, Syria breaks out into a bloody civil war. And there ends up being three major forces pretty quickly. In the beginning it was, who knows, 100 maybe. But pretty quickly it congeals into three forces. There's the Free Syrian Army. Those are the guys we thought of as the good guys. They're the guys we wanted to prevent. They were rebels. Then there was the Syrian government. We hated them because they were a Russian ally. We wanted them gone because this would be a way to take Syria out of the Russian sphere. Right? And then there was Al Qaeda in Iraq, but they were in Syria because because the Iraqis had driven them out of Iraq, and they had escaped to Syria. And they renamed themselves. They renamed themselves the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL. Somehow, a journalist didn't know what Levant was, I guess, went and looked it up and realized that Syria was part of the Levant. Levant is bigger, but Syria is part of the Levant, and renamed it ISIS. So if you hear reference to the ancient Egyptian goddess, that's where that's coming from. I think it's cruel because Isis was kind of a nice goddess. So that's my bias, so I'll say ISIL. We don't do anything really, right? We eventually get the Syrians to give up their weapons of mass destruction again, their chemical weapons. And that's about it. We do send some stuff to the Free Syrian Army. We have allies sending stuff to the Free Syrian Army. The Turks weren't really doing a good job. They were actually sending more of their stuff to ISIL, but that's okay because they're our ally. But like the Brits and the French were trying to send stuff to the Free Syrian Army. Qatar, the little itty bitty joke of a country, was sending stuff to the Free Syrian Army. We sort of sat on the sidelines and watched, and what ended up happening was ISIL defeated the Free Syrian Army for the most part. The Free Syrian Army owns about 5% of Syria now. They've been pretty much marginalized. ISIL also drove the Syrian government back. So what ISIL ended up with by earlier this year was about 40% of Syria. The Free Syrian Army has about 5%, and the Syrian government has the remaining 55 or so percent. Then this summer, about I guess 2 months ago now, 2.5 months ago, ISIL decided it was time to go back to Iraq. And they invaded, 800 men. They were facing off against 2 Iraqi divisions, US trained, US equipped Iraqi divisions, 15,000 men per division. They were facing, this is the small number. I've heard as many as 4 Iraqi divisions, which would be 60,000 men. I'm using the small number because it's easier to defend. All right? They're facing 30,000 men holding northern Iraq. The 800 ISIL fighters caused the 30,000 US-trained Iraqi fighters to turn and run. They drop all their American equipment. Their tanks, armored personnel carriers, their assault rifles, their night vision goggles, everything. They dump it, they get into civilian clothing, and they just run. 30,000 men running as fast as they can to get away from those 800 pickup truck driving ISIL fighters who are looking around going, it's like Christmas. Look at all this American equipment. And they immediately equip. And so they even have aircraft. They can't fly them because they don't know how. I think they're helicopters. I don't think they're fighter jets. But this is insane. They ended up with all this equipment. And they end up capturing about 55% of Iraq in about 2 weeks. They completely surround Baghdad. Baghdad is completely surrounded by ISIL. ISIL was went all the way to the Jordanian border and was heading towards the Iranian border. They were running towards the Kurdish region. All of a sudden, before the United States attacked, the Kurds had a new capital because Kurdistan is broken away from Iraq in reality. On paper, they haven't done it yet. They fly their own flag. They have their own army. They have their own capital. They're done. They're gone. They're no longer in Iraq. But on paper, they still are. Their capital is Erbil. It's this, the Turks have been pouring money. Turkish companies have been pouring money in. They're building this brand new, beautiful city. The Kurds are like, the Kurds are well trained. They've been fighting the Turks for years. They've been fighting the Iraqis for years, fighting the Iranians and the Syrians for years. They kind of know. They know what they're doing. They're no noobs to this. This is their show. Next thing you know, ISIL has not only overrun the frontline Kurdish positions, the Kurds are in full-scale running, and it looks like their capital is going to fall. It looks like our friend in the region, the Kurds, are going to lose their brand new capital. And that's when our president, Barack Obama, finally started intervened. He began bombing the ISIL positions, and that allowed the Kurds time to regroup, and then they actually counterattacked, and they've pushed ISIL back. The ISIL even captured a really important dam. They managed to recapture the dam. And then, of course, you heard about the Yazidi issue. The thing I want you to get away from this is, because people will say, oh my God, all that work, the $2 trillion we spent. By the way, there are 5 million Iraqi orphans. It's a country of 32 million people. 5 million Iraqi orphans, that's like what? One in every 6.5 people is an orphan. Now I'll tell you what the fertility rate is in Iraq. It just happens to be 5, which is really useful. Because that means, if it's 5, it means every woman produces, on average, 5 babies. That's a lot, by the way. I have 2, and I'm ready to become a eunuch. So 5, but that's a good number because it's 5 million. So all I have to do is divide by 5, and that's 1 million dead mothers. But orphans, both parents are dead. So that's 1 million dead dads, too. So that's 2 million dead right there. You want to know what Iraq's dead is? From the U.S. war in 1991, and then the 12 years of brutal sanctions where we cut off their food, and then the subsequent war, the George Bush Jr. war, that at least 2 million people, we have it right there because we got the 5 million orphans. And then on top of that, we've got 1.5 million Iraqi widows. Now, you say, well, women live longer. That's true. And in Iraq, it's not uncommon for a 30-year-old man to marry a 20-year-old woman. So if women live longer and there's a 10-year gap in age, you could expect there to be a higher rate of widows. The problem is in Iraq, women don't really live longer. They have about the same life expectancy as men. But 10-year gap, so you should still have a bunch of widows. Not 1.5 million in a country of 32 million. That's just too much. So there's probably another 500,000 dead there, not to mention all the children who were blown up in the apartments when we were dropping bombs on them, right? So we're talking 2.5, 3 million Iraqis easy that we've murdered over there. That's 10% of their population. We've killed 10% of their population in all this. We blew up their infrastructure. Today, women in Iraq have essentially no rights. If you're in the ISIL part, they have them, right? But in the rest of the country, women have to cover. I think the Iraqi parliament is now 5% women. Remember when I told you it was 34 and 90? Women have lost their positions in the economy. Women have had a catastrophic setback. Now, one of the arguments was, we're going to Iraq to help women. No, the Iraqis should have invaded us. We're now at 17% for our Congress. They were at 34. You go, but their Congress was rubber stamp. It's not always true. The Iraqi Congress did, from time to time, stand up to Saddam Hussein and say, no, we want to go a different way. And he had to bend. Because you're right, because they did it rarely enough that he could. The situation we're in now, where the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, I'm avoiding calling it Islamic State, that's what they officially changed their name to, because I don't want, the Muslims that I'm in contact with tell me they don't want it called that because it sounds like all Muslims belong to that and they hate them. And so I'm keeping ISIL as their name. What these guys have done would have never been possible if we never attacked Iraq to begin with. If we had just left it alone, none of this would have been possible. Because the guy, the tyrant, who was in place, who probably killed 2,000 of his own people over the course of his years in power, not 3 million. Make it 20,000. You know what I mean? Like, just so you don't have to argue the number. It's still a lot less than 3 million. It's like you walk into a doctor's office, you got a weird mole, and he's like, it's cancer. What can you do for it? Well, we're going to cut this off. Wait, you're going to take my leg too? Yeah, you don't want that to spread. Can you just take the pinky? No, we got to be sure. We're actually going to take your heart out too. You're actually going to die. But at least the cancer won't spread. I mean, this is the solution that people, we've made things better in Iraq. Oh my God! Please never improve anything again. Okay, so I know I'm over, but I just want to say this. People are like, well, what should we do? Should we bomb Iraq again? Have you not gotten this? Bombing countries doesn't make them better. I know that seems weird. Like if you just blow up enough children living in their apartments, surely women's rights will improve and they'll become a democracy overnight. Like, what is this about? Like $2 trillion? There's 32. Couldn't we have just gone and given every Iraqi like $100,000? Here's $100,000, and then we want you to sign a contract that you're going to be our friend forever. You know, how many Iraqis do you think would have said no? I don't want your $100,000 in a country where probably the average income was $5,000 per year. I can't sign that. No, you know what I mean? We would have saved so much money. It would have been so much cheaper than $2 trillion. And it wouldn't be ISIL running rampant. They're threatening to invade Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have actually mobilized 30,000 soldiers and put them on the border. If they invade Saudi Arabia, the country with the world's largest proven oil reserve, we will not be able to maintain an air war. We're going to have to go back in with soldiers. There's no way we can allow the largest proven oil reserves on Earth to just fall into ISIL's hands. And so the situation, I don't even see a solution. Bombing it isn't it. I'll tell you that right now. We're sending soldiers in. We've already sent, I think, 500 soldiers, something like that. It's not a lot, but they only had 800, so I guess it makes a difference. I'll do questions, but if you want to leave, I'm totally okay with you heading out now. But does anybody want to ask any questions? I've stunned you that badly. You don't have any questions.
How did 800 men fought against 30,000? How did they manage?
This is going to be one of those questions that people will ask for years. It's not clear. The rumor circulating in Iraq is that the generals ordered the men to dress in civilian clothing and run away. Now, why would they do that? That doesn't even make sense. What it probably boils down to is that the Iraqi military had no confidence in the government that it was part of. That the government, they thought of the government as illegitimate. They didn't want anything to do with it. Nouri al-Maliki was rated by the UN as the most corrupt human being on the planet Earth at one point. Nouri al-Maliki, the guy that we put in as the puppet to rule Iraq, was the Shia version of Saddam Hussein. He was brutal to the Sunni population. He completely alienated the Sunnis. The Sunni population, which is only 20%, totally, let me rephrase it. The Sunni population partially supports ISIS because they hate the Shia government so much. Because the Shia government has been so nasty to them as a result of our invasion and conquest of Iraq. So it's hard to say because that army was Shia. But apparently it was mostly Shia. Apparently they just didn't have confidence, and they paid for it because the guys that ISIL captured, they made them lay down on the ground, and then they took assault rifles and shot them to death. And you can see the video on YouTube. Don't. It's really upsetting. Like, just don't do it. Don't look at what these guys are doing because it's just too hideous. I mean, they're hacking people's heads off and shooting, making you lay down and shooting you, and then they go back over and I looked because I'm an idiot. And they go back over and they shoot you. I shouldn't describe it to you. They shoot just to make sure you're really dead. This is nasty, rough, brutal bastards. And I think they were just scared. I think it was a combination of the government's illegitimate, they're poorly trained because we trained them. They had no morale, they had no confidence in the government, they had no confidence in their generals, and they just fell apart and ran. But it is one of those weird things. Like people will look back on this moment and go, either ISIL was made up of geniuses, or there's something really endemically wrong with the state we established.
How come Saddam Hussein didn't know the U.S. strategy? Was he corrupt? Was he dumb?
I don't think
he didn't understand what U.S. is doing.
Yeah, I don't think Saddam Hussein will go down in history as one of the smartest guys ever. I mean, I think dumb might be a decent description. He was a bully. That's what his job was. He was the thug in the Ba'athist party. He wasn't the brains. He was the guy who was the enforcer who would go in there and break people's kneecaps. So, like all of a sudden he's in charge, and you're like, oh, God, couldn't he have done better? And that's the nature of power. I mean, we had Junior. You know, the 80 IQ. He was meant to be a ditch digger, and we made him president of the United States. Just, by the way, he got a degree from Yale, so Yale can't be a good school. And he got a degree from Harvard, so he's discredited that place too. You know what I mean? How he passed courses in either of those, just money. Family connection. His dad went to Yale. Like, his dad was a decent man, smart. You know, at least a 3-digit IQ. And then he has this half-retarded child, destroys the United States, destroys Iraq, you know, goes on a rampage. It's got to be embarrassing. Senior must just be appalled. There's a reason Senior didn't try to destroy Iraq. It was because it would have been a stupid thing to do. I mean, the region, Iraq stabilized the region. You had Syria on one side, you had Iraq, Turkey on the other side, Iran on the other side, and Saudi Arabia on the other side. Iraq was sort of the keystone of this. Now there's a vacuum where these powers that don't like each other have a vacuum that ISIL is taking over. ISIL will become a new power in the region, unless somehow we get rid of them, which doesn't seem likely. And by the way, they're connecting with other forces. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has declared that it's with ISIL. It's ready to go. As soon as ISIL forces roll into Saudi Arabia, they're going to come from Yemen and invade Saudi Arabia from the other side, and they're going to go. You know, like, this is becoming a global movement.
So, this is probably a silly question, but like after all the times that we bombed Iraq, and we clearly don't care what the rest of the world thinks about our actions, like why didn't we just take Iraq and take their oil?
Well, we did take their oil initially. The problem was there was too much world outcry against it. And even Iraq resisted it. We went to the Iraqi government and tried to make Nouri al-Maliki, our puppet, sign a document that would have basically given us their oil revenue for years. And he said, I can't do this, I'll be dead, they'll shoot me to death, I'm never signing this thing. There was too much resistance. But we probably did steal. Officially, we lost tens of billions of dollars worth of oil. I don't have a really good number. I've heard 60 billion, I've heard 200 billion, I've heard 10 billion, but there's a significant, but we spent $2 trillion to do it. You know what I mean? Like, people are like, I'm going to vote for Bush because he's a businessman. He's a businessman who bankrupted 2 companies and almost bankrupted the Texas Rangers. Like, did you not look at his business record? Yeah, he's a businessman, but he's not a good one. And he just spent $2 trillion to steal at most $200 billion worth of oil. That's not a good business transaction. But we did. We actually had Congress saying that oil is ours until we pay off the debt. It cost. We actually wanted to charge the Iraqi people for us invading them. You know what I mean? It would be like if after that guy shot Brown in Ferguson, after the cop shot Brown, it would be like if the cops came and charged the family money for the shooting. You know, we'd like to. Yeah, we just murdered your son. You owe us now $100,000 for the service. It's just weird. How did we come up with this? How did we come up with we get to charge Iraq? And it never really worked except for the oil that we stole. And then we forced Iraq to accept U.S. oil companies. That was the other part of it. So I mean, technically, the theft is still kind of going on because Iraq did not want U.S. oil companies. Iraq had switched oil trade deals to the euro. It was the first country on earth to go from the dollar to another currency. And then we bombed them and forced them back to the dollar. In the meantime, though, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela have all switched to the euro. So there's been a mass defection of oil exchange from the dollar to other currencies. I think only the euro. And then annexing a country, how do you do that in this day and age? Like, it would just be really weird. It's not doable.
Well, it sounds a little bit more.
Well, I mean, look what the Iraqis did.
What you're saying we did.
Look what the Iraqis did to us when we just tried to install a puppet government, right? They still fought us tooth and nail. Imagine if we had tried to go the extra step. Any other questions?
So, what is the ISIL strategy, and what do they want in the end to
They-
get Iran?
Okay, so in the end is a tricky question because they have the small scale, they have kind of a bigger plan, and then they have the big plan. And by the way, the big plan is conquer planet Earth. I'm serious. Their goal is to make the whole planet Earth ruled by the Islamic State. and they know that's the dream and it'll never happen. So okay, so we can set that aside and get rid of it. Their short-term immediate goals is to finish off Iraq, murder all the Shia. They're just going to wipe them out, murder guys like the Yazidis. They're not murdering the Christians, by the way. There was a lot of news coming out that they were, and I was even reporting it because I thought that was true. The reason I don't think it's true now is because the Bishop of Mosul, the Roman Catholic Bishop of Mosul, has come out and said, as far as he knows, only 5 Christians have died so far, and it was because a mortar shell landed in a combat situation near them. It wasn't intentional. And the Islamic State has said that they won't murder Christians as long as they pay. There's a tax for Christians that they have to pay. As long as they pay that, they won't be murdered. Having said that, everybody else, all bets are off. They're going to wipe you out. So there's other people too, besides the Yazidis. There's also the Mandians. You know, there's other groups that are in really big trouble. By the way, this would also apply to Jews technically. I don't know that they have any Jews under their control at this point, but technically they should not be murdered. They would just pay the tax. So their short-term goal is to finish off Iraq. Their more immediate, or their next range goal, would be to then invade Jordan, probably Saudi Arabia, secure Mecca, secure Jordan, and then they would obviously want to invade Israel at some point in the immediate future and finish that mess off. And their goal would then be to go all the way to Morocco, and their less ambitious goal, not the planet Earth goal, is to take Spain, take Portugal, because that used to be Muslim ruled, right? And then go all the way across Asia to Indonesia. And they would rule everything from Spain to Indonesia, including most of North Africa and a huge swath through Asia. So, and I wouldn't be surprised if they want to replicate Ottoman Empire's territories, so go into the Balkans and even chunks of Russia and Ukraine. Now, it's easy to laugh, but remember, 800 guys, they took out 30,000 men. So they're apparently tough. They're apparently really, it's just hard to wrap my mind around. But you have to remember, they're inspired. They're inspired by an event that happened in 633. And the event that happened in 633 was a handful of Arabs under the leadership of a general named Khalid ibn Walid. He had 15,000 men under his command. He did a series of battles in Persia and then a series of battles in the Roman Empire. He fought 50 battles all total. He won 49 and he tied 1. It goes down in history as probably the greatest or the second greatest military person ever, right? Better than Napoleon, better than Robert E. Lee. I know it's sacrilege to say, but he was undefeated. Lee lost battles. He lost Gettysburg, for example. Right? He lost Mechanicsville. He lost Chancellorsville. He won Chancellorsville. He lost the Wilderness. You know, there were these really important battles that Lee needed to win. Lee needed to win, and he didn't. And you go, well, yeah, but he was outnumbered. So was Khalid ibn Walid. The Battle of Firaz, it's right near the border between Iraq and Syria today, and so it's in the ISIL area. So they can go. I don't think we know exactly where Firaz is, but they can go approximately to where it is and be inspired by it. The Persians and the Romans realized they had to work together. They were bitter enemies, hated each other's guts. And so they came together at Firaz, and they formed an army of 150,000 men. Khalid ibn Walid had 15,000 men. He was outnumbered 10 to 1. They needed to cross the Euphrates. One side or the other had to cross the Euphrates. So what Khalid ibn Walid did was he pulled his men away from the Euphrates because he knew that the Romans and Persians wouldn't cross as long as he was up against it. So he pulled his men away, and he broke his men into 3 groups, 3 5,000 men groups, and spread them out. So that there was one to the north of where the crossing was, one to the south, and then one straight ahead of the crossing. And he waited until about 50,000, so he's still outnumbered 3 to 1. About 50,000 Persians and Romans had crossed the Euphrates, and he attacked. He sent the 5,000 men to the north and the south along the Euphrates, and he had the other 5,000 men come straight in. And their whole goal wasn't to kill, it was to corral and push the Roman and Persian armies in close tight so they couldn't move their arms, so they couldn't swing their weapons. And then once he got them corralled, he just kept pushing. He pulled his men back into cavalry charges, and he kept pushing and pushing. And they literally fell down on top of each other. 50,000 men crammed together, fell down, bones breaking, dying, screaming, and then they run into the river, and he just charges into them after the river. By the time the battle was done, Khalid had lost like 200 men. He killed 50,000 and drove the other 100,000 running, screaming off into the desert. And they're looking at that going, we can do that. And apparently they can. With 800 men, they took out 30,000. And they're looking at that and they're going, God is on our side. We got this thing. And I'm looking at it and going, I'm having doubts about my own beliefs now. Because this looks like Khalid ibn Walid. And Khalid was a rough bastard, right? If you read the commentary about this guy's life while he was alive, people did not think of him as a holy man. Like at one point he murders a guy because he wants the guy's wife. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a rough thing to do. Couldn't he have just convinced him, like, I'm going to kill you or you get a divorce? You know what I mean? But no, he's like, nah, I'm just going to kill him. So he's not a role model for how to live a good Muslim life, but he is a role model for how to fight a war. And I have to imagine they're looking at that going, I think we can do this. And they're thinking, because the Arabs went from, in 633, to being nothing. They were a joke. They were locust eaters living in the Arabian Peninsula. They had nothing. There were very few of them. They were technologically inferior, and there weren't many of them. That was redundant. And they went all the way to Spain, and they went all the way to China. They actually began surrender negotiations with China. The only reason China didn't get invaded or surrender was because the Arabs had a civil war break out. And the Arab armies contracted to go murder each other to figure out who was going to be in charge next. Had they not done that civil war, China would be Muslim today. They were there. I mean, and that's what these ISIL guys are thinking. We could have done it then, but we're going to do it this time. That's scary. People with that much conviction are very scary. Because how do you fight that? And you know why it exists? We created it. The alternative was secular pan-Arabist socialists from the 1950s and 60s. Had we not fought that movement then, that's what we'd be dealing with now. They would look like Europeans, because that's basically what Europeans are. They're pan-European, secular socialists. You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, that's horrible. Like, imagine working with Germany or Sweden. And instead we got ISIL or the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That's not exactly something you look up to. That's our ally? Wow, that's great. Anyway, I'm way over, so I'm going to call it here unless there's one last good question. All right, good. Thanks.